So, this is Michele Leavitt, and I'm Sandra Gail Lambert, and this is the third of our Hip Chick series on memoir writing. The title of this one is Research. It doesn't have to be boring. Michele, this is your area. You do research in your personal essays, and you do it just so well, and you integrate it really seamlessly. I think, can you start by telling us how you decide what to research?
Yeah, so I turn to research whenever there's something that I don't know or something that I want to know. And I have to confess first, as you know, that I'm a recovering lawyer and a recovering academic. So those are two areas where people are famous for writing in a very boring way. And some of that comes from, adopting a certain voice, the legal voice or the academic voice. So, but research takes a lot of different forms, and the very first one that I would use is when I'm writing about an event and I don't remember things the way I want to, or I think I remember something, but I'm not sure, then I can turn to research by just asking another person who was involved in the event what they remember, and that helps. That helps me be more sure about what I'm writing.
So, for instance,
So I recently I wrote an essay about meeting my aunt for the first time. My aunt is the same age as me, and I had a memory as I was writing the essay that we had once talked about how she missed most of the third grade in school, and I missed most of the third grade in school. But I wasn't really clear on the memory, so I called her up and asked her, "Did you miss third grade in school, and did we talk about that?" And she said, "No, I didn't miss third grade," so I couldn't use that, even though it would have helped me to make my point about how we were living parallel lives, even though we didn't know each other. So that was out the window.
being ethical and all that.
Yeah, ethical, yeah. So, you're writing a memoir, you're writing the truth. Of course, you're writing your truth, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the way somebody else remembers it. But I think if something didn't actually happen to another person, then you probably have to take it out. Yeah. And then the other way, the other times I turn to research is sometimes, in my own letters, my own journals, or letters that other people have written me. Those are really good, and I recommend to everybody, never throw anything like that away. You never know when it's going to be useful. I threw away my journals from when I was 16 to 17, and I'm really sorry I did, even though they were totally, totally putrid and horrible, and I would never want anybody to see them. They still could have been good material for me.
And then you do more formal research, right?
Yeah. So even with the kind of personal records, you can sometimes you yourself or other people have been involved with the government in some way, and so you can do a Freedom of Information Act request. And I did that to get my father's FBI file, and yeah. So that was a little bit more formal, but it wasn't what I expected it to be. So I know you've gotten your medical file from when you were a military brat.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Well, it was sort of dull. I mean, I thought, here I have all this information to back up what for me were these sort of half-remembered intense swirls of emotion, but of course none of that is in the file. I mean, there were some things about explaining certain scars I had, but mainly it was just sort of boring. I mean, did not have the opening, overwhelming effect that I thought it would.
Yeah, I remember as a kid sneaking a look at my record in the hospital, which they didn't want you to see at that time, and it was all about how much I had peed. So it's pretty boring. Yeah. So my father's FBI file was actually pretty boring. It was over 700 pages. I should have known as a former lawyer just how dull it would be. A lot of it was surveillance. We sat outside this building and nothing happened. It's outside that building and nothing happened. But I did get about 5 words that I could use out of it. That was about how another person involved in the investigation was characterized. That helped me to clarify some of the class issues that I was working with. But I was hoping it would tell me something about my father and who he was. But that was useless. That was a false hope. Yeah.
But back to the title of the presentation. I mean, how to not make it boring. I mean, I've read early essays of yours, and it'll, you know, in it, I'll read along, and it's this like, oh, amazing personal essay with all this, you know, oh, it's so, and then this formal voice will drop in these facts. But by the time you finish writing it and working with it, there's not that division anymore. It's all this flowing, moving thing, and the voice doesn't shift in any sort of dramatic way. How do you do that?
It's through really, really radical cutting. So when I start writing an essay where I'm going to use research, like for example, I wrote an essay about one of my nephews who was incarcerated, and so some of that essay actually relied on letters that he had written to me. I quoted from those letters, but I also wanted to put something in about prison statistics and the prevalence of drug addiction and alcoholism among people who are incarcerated, because I had a point I wanted to make. And in early drafts of that, I used a lot of the information from those statistics and different resources like Bureau of Justice, Department of Corrections, the state of Georgia where he was incarcerated. And as the revisions went along, I just cut and cut and cut until I was only including conclusions instead of the evidence that led up to those conclusions. But in earlier drafts, I would start out even using citations like I would in an appellate brief or an academic paper. And that gave me a sense of security, that what I was writing was legit and could be backed up. And even though the final product has no citations in it at all because it's memoir, and very little in the way, hopefully nothing in the way of official speak, I know that if I need to pull that stuff out, pull out the actual evidence, I have it on hand.
And don't you think that, I mean, whether you write like you do sometimes or like I do more, and maybe all memoir writers, this is true for all, we don't want to be wrong. We want to, you said this before, we don't want to be wrong. We want to cover our ass. We want to have no one be able to say, you're a liar.
Mm-hmm.
And you found a great way of doing that with your style of writing.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize too that nobody can tell us what our stories are, and we'll remember things differently than our best friend or our spouse remembers them. And our memories are valid, completely valid. So research is helpful, but especially the personal research that you do with other people about how they remember things, or even using letters or journals. I'd be cautious about letting that get in the way of my own memory or my own experience of a particular event. Yeah. But the other kind of research, the more formal research, it doesn't have to be boring. It's like, this is another cliche about writing. What you see at the end is the tip of the iceberg, and all the other stuff that's underneath it is the hard work that went into it, and the multiple drafts and the multiple pages. And writing any kind of art is more a process, I think, of selection than anything else. We're selecting what it is out of this vast sea of knowledge and experience, what we're going to tell, the story that we're going to tell. And everybody's story is different.